Okay, it's Kelly Borsheim here again, and I'm going to continue the painting. One thing, I was starting to lay in the background color, okay? And, ciao, Greg's. One thing that happened is, as I got closer into the head, I decided that I wanted to leave myself the option of having this light reflection here that's on the water near his head. But as I started to draw on the shape, the ear was too low, and because I was making relationships, and I realized the white needed to come into the ear, but the ear was down here. So that gave me a clue that something was off on my proportions for something. So what I did was I ended up going back to, every time I find an error, I have to find out whether it's large or small. So I went to measure the top of the figure here, from the top of the head to the bottom of the bum, measure this distance, and then I took it from the edge of the bum here and to where the foot was, okay? I made this relationship to make sure that my overall picture was good, because one thing is, do I extend the head, or is some part of the body perhaps too long, and that would make the ear relative to the head size and stuff. So it was a matter of tracing and triangulating. I decided this foot here was a little bit too long and moved it back, changed a little bit of here. I put this more as a horizontal line, because another thing that I noticed on the round canvas was that, which I've done it again but by trying to go back to the other room, I ended up making another mark in the front here where the hanger is in the back, because this is going to hang vertically, and I had to be careful because there's a slot for the screw to go in, and then but it hangs here. So I did this and leaned this forward and hung a plumb line so that I would know what the vertical is, because that will change the relationships, obviously, if I change the angle of things. So I fixed that. And then what became glaringly obvious, the lollipop was in the wrong place too, because it should go a little bit closer here. So I've made the hand a little bit smaller, and a little closer to the leg, and refined these negative shapes in here and such like that. And that'll continue while I'm painting. But one thing that became obvious is once I actually tilted it back where it was, putting in my little blocks here, this is not water because it's too diagonal shaped. Do you see that? Even though I was focusing on putting in the darks as they go here, but the fact is the wave is going like this. So I need to, as I'm making this, do it more as a stair step and not as a diagonal, so to change the energy. So right now I'm going to come back in and change some of this up. Also, what became glaringly obvious as I stood back, which I hope is also obvious in your video here, this is very, very warm. It doesn't come across now, with no other relationships there, it doesn't come across as water with green reflections. It comes across as a green field of grass, okay? So I want to make this, put in a little bit, perhaps raw umber, tone it down a little bit, certainly move the green chroma into a warmer color, and that's where I'm going to go. I put on an extra light over here because with this current setup, I moved the easel, I forgot to say, because this easel is a display easel and it was too low. So I was having a problem. I don't like to paint like this because it hurts the back, and if your body hurts, then at some point you're going to stop painting, or you're going to have a headache, or you're going to get something that doesn't feel so great. So I decided to put this up on the little stair here, and it's not a great solution, but the easel's quite wide with the legs, so I didn't have a lot of options on that. So anyway, I wanted to watch me what I'm trying to do. I just temporarily put my little thing here just so it's closer and I don't need to hold it, because that's another problem with the setup, is I don't really have a lot of things to do. Okay, so I took a brush with some white. I mixed a wee bit of the blue in it just to get a cooler color, and started to put in this shape here of the reflected water. I mean the light hitting stronger the light. So it's going, again, I'm making a relationship, so the mid-ear, and it goes up elongated. I can see here I've got it too high up, but I can knock that back down when I put the next layers on. And so I'm working in this, and I'm using brush strokes short and choppy because I haven't really painted water before, but what I notice about the people who do paint water, and also looking at water, is because the water is in a little bit of movement, you're going to have different planes all the time that catch the light in different ways. And so when you do this, you want to have short strokes and make these little breaks happen that you go. But the little short strokes are following a larger pattern, okay? So this may be all one wave and it's broken down into choppy little parts. But I want to get the overall shape here. And then I started mixing, this is one of my muted greens, I think the green umber and the raw umber, and I mixed those together. You can still see, I hope, that the paint is fairly transparent, and I like that. When I put the white in, of course, that's not going to be transparent, and I'm not as worried about that at this point. But right now, the goal is to get everything in the painting covered with some sort of pigment, or not, so that I can decide how the relationships are really working together. Then I go in and paint another layer and continue with what I'm doing here. So anyway, I spoke before about the diagonalness that I had put in from my twisted canvas, and now I want to go in and make all these here. So in that regard, I was making this diagonal here into stair steps, so that I keep the idea of the wave. And I'm going to continue with this going on here. So, oh, Gregory's a force today. The beast. My landlord's dog. Okay, so, and let's see. So if I look at the reference, I see a little bit of darks up in here. And they're pretty much right above the end of the hand in the lollipop. So I measure up here, and I'm going to say, okay. And then from this mark, I'll put that in a wee bit darker. And I'm going to go just swoosh and swoosh. And then here, if I really study this, what I see is there's a wave that comes up here and goes down and goes up again. Okay, a wave up here, down. So it's on the downside of this wave because the sun is coming from this direction, as you can tell from his body, that you can see the light is on the edge of the shoulder here, and then the dark is on this side. So the sun is coming from here. So that means that on the downside of the wave, it's going to be the shadow size of a hill that's going up. It's going to receive light, and then it's going to go back down. And it may be mixed up a little bit because the sun could be, actually, look at the way it's hitting the leg here. The sun is probably right about here in direction, not here. Okay, so that means that depending on where it is in the crest of the wave, you're going to have light happening in different places. Okay, but basically I see a diagonal of darks going this direction, ending just before the vertical of his head, so right about here. So I'm going to start a diagonal like this. So do you see my sloping? Now the thing is, I'm being a little bit too even, because that's what we tend to do. We tend to be. So I'll break that up, pull some of these into a little bit here, pull, and then continue it on back in here. And the other thing to note is, as I get further away from the subject, I want to get not only looser, but also a little bit muted in color. I don't necessarily want the same strength of color far away from him as I do him, because I want the eye to go here. I do want the eye to go here and travel around the painting and find these little surprises and joys, but at the moment, right now, I just want to be consciously thinking of the subject matter and everything, emphasizing it. Now here, what I wanted to point out to you is I purposely went into his head. Why? Because I don't want to try to keep the edges all straight. I can draw this again, and I will be drawing it again. That's a given for me, maybe for everybody. But I want these soft edges, and I don't want it to look as if his head is actually cut out and plastered underneath these leaves, or the front of the seat. So to do that, you need the soft edges to join things together visually. And okay, and because this is a process of layering, which perhaps means I'm already not painting like Soroya, but this is why artists do copies, because then you can take a painting actually done by the artist and study each stroke and how the light happens and the strength of the stroke. life in Italy. Okay. So keeping all the soft edges, and I'm going to go in. Now I'm going to go in with a different color. I could go in with a different brush, but I feel like the colors are close enough together that it's not bad, because I'm just slightly better at washing brushes as I am at washing palettes. So I'm going to lighten this up, put in a different colors of these greens to give me some kind of variety here. And then I'll go in and say, okay, let's study again. Okay, maybe I need a little bit more. I don't really want too much light, but I do want to distinguish it. And to give me an idea of what's actually going on here. And I can see that I don't want too much white here. It actually is going to be the color of water with the trees reflected in it. So it's not going to be a pure white in any event. Okay? So keep on going down here. I'm going to add some darker color into here, mushing it. While the water may not all have soft edges, I prefer to, when I'm scribbling in, I really want to just get basic shapes figured out and basic tones figured out. I prefer to make everything soft because I can pull in the hard edges later once I stand back and evaluate what I'm doing and see. But right now it's a little bit too early for that. I may know that I'll leave that as a sharper edge there, but when I come over here, I just really want to sort of fill in this kind of color that's happening. And I have a really hard time using paint on my brush. Not sure why. But, okay. And again, I want to keep the striations going. See, this is darker in here, right at the curve of the hand. Now, I'm going to negate myself a little bit based on what I had said before about the head. The head has the color of the hair in it, and the hair is darker. But right here on the edge of the shoulder, that's the lightest part of the painting. So while I want to go in there, I also probably will go in later and wipe it out and try to remove some of that. Because I want to keep this the lightest light that I possibly can. I don't want to have it necessarily outlined, but I also know because this is the edge of the subject and it's a high contrast area. This edge, the edge of between here and the water is going to be sharper in general. Over here, it's going to mush together a little bit more because, again, his head is not so much the subject, but also he's got soft, wispy hair and flying off. When you have hair, you really want soft edges for hair. I have no idea what he's doing downstairs. I'm going to go look. See you later. So back again, that was a bit fun. Alright, so I'm going to start in. Again, I'm trying to fill in all this stuff here, and we'll see, as thinking about the direction of the strokes, the color, the hue, everything as I go along. Okay, so I can see as I'm getting into the hand here, the hand not only is a lighter flesh tone in general than the background is, so I need to remember that, but it's also a warmer color, reddish color, whereas this is kind of a yellowy green. But I can see that the tone that I put here, when I squint my eyes, it could be right, and I might not know that it's right because this is obviously too white from what it will be. So again, it's all about relationships. But I'm trying to put in a fairly good guess here, and, oh, continue now. I just met Matteo, the new guy working for the gas company, read the meter, and didn't know where to go. So, isn't that a fun way to meet somebody? Alright. And he looked up my YouTube channel. Even sweeter. Yeah, I'm pulling in this way, reading the strokes. Now, this doesn't seem very waterous to me at this point, and I'm going to pull into this hand here because that's on the shadow side, so I don't mind if it's a little too dark, but I want to make sure that I don't want to leave a white halo around anything, so I would rather have a softer edge, meaning that a darker tone meets faster than I would have a halo, and a halo simply means, you know, well, it's a halo, it's a lighter form that follows the shape. Okay. So that doesn't look like water, but I'll come in with darker tones right now. But right now my main goal is to swoosh this in, and I'm being horizontal again, and I can do this rolly thing. I can see I've got too much yellow now left into my brush, so I'm going to go put in a little bit more of the green and the raw umber to tone down some of that yellow. So, one thing I wanted to remark on that, goodness, this is why people who do their palettes better than this, I think, I always like to mix things at the last minute on stuff, and other minds are really good at saying, I'm going to mix this color, examine what kind of colors I want to hear, and make a big bunch of that stuff, and then they grab in and they go to this. I'm not really sure why I really resist doing that. I've tried to do it in my Kelly way, but I find that ultimately I don't want to spend time doing this. I want to spend time here. So I tend to blend things on with here. The other thing I tell myself, and I don't know if it's a justification or not, but I don't want paint by number pieces. In other words, I don't really care that the color is exact to what my reference is. Whether it's a photographic reference, which is already going to be an interpretation of something else, of a machine for what you saw in nature, or even a copy of what I think I see in front of me. I don't necessarily want to copy that. So I like this layers of colors, and I like it that this yellow is going to stay there in some form or another, and as I put other things on it, it's going to come through. I feel as though that's prettier, and I feel as though that gives a lot more interest into this area. And there's a lot of justification that in nature it's not just one solid leafy green color. It's a lot of little things that are happening that make light reflect off of things, and that's the way we understand why we see something as green versus why we see it as blue, although blue is an interesting color. But anyway, the idea is that it's all about how things come together to make a reflection for what our eyes see, with the ability our eyes have and the science that's all involved in how all that gets put together. So those are other subjects you can check out on YouTube for sure. But yeah, right now on this hand, I can see that his pinky is going to curve in like this. I'm going to actually have fingers of different lengths, okay? And I want to be accurate with that, but right now I don't want him to have a mitten hand, but at the same time I would rather paint my background into the hand a little bit, as long as I don't do it so much that my brain gets used to seeing a small hand, proportionately speaking, to the rest of the body. Because what I find is a strange thing that happens to the brain, or at least my brain, but perhaps all brains, is when you get used to looking at something, it becomes your new norm, okay? And that's why they say you've got to create a habit in, I don't know, 14 or 28 days or whatever the formula is that the person's promoting. But it's true, because why do we feel in love with where we're born with, a place that we're born with? Sometimes it merits it, and sometimes it's just because we've spent so much time there and we've found ourselves falling in love with it because it's the best way to survive and live, that familiar things become attractive to us. On the other hand, the other part is true. Familiar things also become boring for us. So it's all true, and it's all a matter of balance. So, but the main point, getting back to this, is I don't want to later have to go, oh, my pinky was shorter than what my background is, and I made myself a halo. But on the other hand, I don't want to end up having a disproportionate hand that's going to look funny, and someone else is going to say later, wow, that just doesn't look right. And you go, but the model was that way. No, it doesn't work that way. The painting has to stand on its own. No reference material allowed whatsoever. But I'm going to paint into this. Now, the Lollipop stick, it is a piece of white. It's a very thin piece of white. It's also perhaps going to stay the title of this painting, and so in that case, I'm not so worried that I end up putting a very thick chunk of white paint that will be opaque. And then this. I can leave a little bit of the Lollipop, and maybe it's a small feature that I can actually go in with a tinier brush and get rid of any halos. But halos I find are really difficult sometimes, especially if you actually paint thick, then you end up having a physical ridge to fight with, and it never quite looks the same. And what I find interesting is if you don't paint with enough light, or you I don't know, or you paint maybe with the wrong color light, such as tungsten lighting and, you know, the very dramatic thing. When you take it out in the daylight or you photograph it, which is really a good indicator, you start to see all these things that you didn't see before. And that is one reason I like to photograph my art as I go along, so that when I'm looking at my painting in the computer, I say, oh, that looks different. Oh, don't like what's going on there. And then it really, really helps to do things that way. So, all right, so let's continue with this painting here and see where we're gonna be heading next. Gonna do the same thing up over the leg, and again, I'm trying to stay more horizontal than not, because even though there are waves that are going into this river, in general, I'd rather err on the side of horizontal. I can always add an up and down here and there. So now, I didn't paint right next to this because one approach would be to paint this solid color and then go break it up. But I find it much more interesting, again, to have the broken color where I've got the white here. I put a neighbor next to this that's not the same, because otherwise, I mean, it is that idea of using the field color. If I want it to all be together, then I would put that all consistent color here. And as I did for a future painting of mine, I painted this the other day just to give me a basic green. I want it to dry, and it's going to be sitting there for a while, but thank goodness on wood, so it'll suck it up a lot faster and I can get moving. And I don't want to just sit here randomly and put in all this stuff and go, oh, I'm so good at random, because the thing is, again, you're going to start making patterns. That's what's normal. But I do want to study the reference material, and I see there's some light green going on in here, some lighter, warmer greens. And then also I see on the other side of the knee here, there's a green. So do you see what I'm doing is I'm actually going, okay, and now I just noticed what I did. I was trying to follow the line of my drawing, so I went diagonally, and then I went diagonally. But when I finished it, I went in and said, okay, here's my horizontal, boom. Because that changes the stroke of the painting, okay? So I went in this way to make sure I have paint covering all the places that I want paint to be covering. Here I can see that I've not done a really good job of defining the knee, so I'm going to go in a little bit in past some of that and figure that out, okay? Obviously I'm getting too few of paint on there. So that was nice meeting Mateo, cute kid. Okay, so now when I really study the water, I can see there's a shape going this way. I'm looking at the short, sharp, little dark lines that are going up in here. And it starts maybe right above the knee here, because you see I've got a darker paint. So, and then I'm going to go in this way. And then I can see there's another one, and I say a diagonal because it's going off in this way, but I still want to keep those horizontal strokes, because when I stood back to look at my piece, this is what I saw going on, okay? And there's one down at the pinky there, okay? Now, if I weren't doing this video now, and I may do it still, I would really be standing back a lot, and after every 3 or 4 strokes or something, I would probably stand back. Is that the effect that I'm looking for? And it's a little early to tell, to be honest, because again, I don't have experience painting water and knowing if it's going to go on okay or not. But now, even with just this little bit I've seen, do you see I've got a higher chroma green, a lighter yellowish green, I've got some browns, I've got some whites with a little bit of blue mixed in. That's actually going to be a future rock. So even with this little bit, I'm not creating a solid background for this figure. And it's already interesting, relatively speaking, because of the strokes that I'm using and the fact that I'm changing up the color. So there are lots of ways to do things, and I think it's important to try to change those things up once in a while so that you feel comfortable with what you're going, because I said I wanted to paint like Soroya the same way last time I said I wanted to try to paint like somebody else, and I find that is really, really complicated for me. Part of it is because it is really difficult to break a habit, and you get into a mode of painting. And another thing is it is difficult to change the voice that you've been taught to use. Okay, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you probably know more about art history than I do. But I do recognize that a lot of artists changed their styles dramatically, especially those that went away from realism. They started off in some sort of realism study and broke away from that. And I think that's a valid point, as long as they continue to be interesting, or I should say for them maybe interested in what they're doing, because otherwise it's just kind of being different to be different. I don't really see what the point is for that, but you know, to each their own. And I'm saying this, but I don't mean it as a crit of anybody, because I'm kind of strange. I like to go to museums and I love to see art and all that, but at some point I need a break from it, because I find it, at some point I get overwhelmed with it, but also I just get antsy. I want to come in and do stuff, but I don't want to be too influenced by everything that I've seen. And I do think that your brain fills up with the things that you think about, and I would like to spend more time, I think, alone with my own painting desires and abilities, and to see about where I would go without having all of these other people in my head. And but of course there's a balance, because no one really is truly self-taught, and I don't know why people use that phrase all the time, but they seem to think it's somehow cooler if you're not taught by other people. But what they really are mostly saying is autodidacts, because when you read that someone says he's self-taught, then you go look at his portfolio, or her portfolio, because there's more female artists in the world, aren't there? You often find that person has taken workshops. Well, a workshop is obviously not self-taught, so come on, what are you talking about here? What they really mean by saying is, I haven't gone through a fit school program that, you know, to get a degree or anything like that. So that's what they mean by that. But that's not really the same as self-taught, is it? Off that bandwagon. But yeah, balance. Everything is about balance, and only you know what that balance is going to be for you. And so that's what I mean. I'm not judgmental. What I'm really trying to do when I say these things is to let you know that there are artists who are quite happy in general. I mean, I'd like to make more sales, but in general, there are artists who are quite happy with not doing things the way that we're told that we're supposed to do them. Okay? I mean, the art marketing thing and the education and all that stuff. So, but you know, in this period of my lifetime, I'm quite happy that realism is coming back, because when I started to study art in Austin, Texas as an adult, because my mother is an artist and she still makes art to this day even, and she enjoys what she does. But they're more personal projects for family and friends. But as I started to study art, I was into representational things, and when I was studying, it was in Austin, Texas, and it seemed that they really had the mode still to go for stuff that bizarre shapes. What I would probably not very nicely say is I felt like there was more talking about what the art meant than actually using a visual language to explain something that you're experiencing or want to portray. So that just wasn't my bent, and I ended up going to Colorado I was working 60 hours a week at a time at a photo lab doing image preservation for Library of Congress and National Geographic and National Institute of Health and those kind of fun things. And I only got a week vacation a year, so about three times I went to the Loveland Academy of Arts, which no longer exists. But they invited famous artists from around the United States to come and teach a week-long workshop, and so I did that a couple of times, and that was a great relief, because in Loveland, Colorado, if you've ever been to the sculpture gardens there, and they have the shows and stuff, it was a paradise for somebody that wanted to see that the realism was not this horrible thing that some people made it out to be. And I was really happy about that. On the flip side, the other thing that was nice is that there were some pieces that were too realistic for me that I didn't like, and that was good to understand my own borders, you know? So, anyhow, alright, so let's put it, it's silly that I'm trying to finger paint when I don't actually have paint on the board. So, really need to, good grief, I say so a lot, don't I? And now I see that my palette is getting empty. And I've got too much blue in there. Now, I'm going to share with you something that a really lovely person, Robert Genn, is, and something that he said many, many years ago. He was amazing. He's a Canadian painter, and he started an online community. I got on the internet in 1996. I had a friend of mine show me how it worked. He spent 2 hours at his home, and he showed me how the internet worked and how you could find things to learn about how to write HTML. And then in Austin, Texas, it was the tech boom, and there was all this information free about how to write your web pages. But I was floored when Robert wrote to me, and he said, I'm starting this new online community thing. Would you like to be a part of this and subscribe and blah, blah. I said, another artist from Canada that I've never met, never even heard of, found my website, and he found me online, and this is fantastic. And oh, Mateo's looking at his phone while he drives. Not nice. Uh-oh. Anyway, it worked, and he did this letter Tuesdays and Fridays every day for years until he died. And his daughter took it over after that. But one of the newsletters were always fascinating, and I think his main rule was it had to be on a topic of art. But you know, that covered so many different things. And so one of the things that I read that has always stuck with me was this idea of scarcity versus abundance. So, for example, what he said, if I only have one 16 by 20 canvas in my studio that's waiting for me to do something with it, I find that this one that I'm working on goes much slower because I'm stretching out this time because I don't have anything coming up next. So he would go out and buy a whole bunch of canvases that were empty and waiting for him, and they would sit there, and then all of a sudden back to being prolific. And I like the idea of that, because what I find is, even though I don't want to spend a lot of money putting paint out, and with my life, I don't always get time to paint when I want to. So sometimes I ended up losing a lot of paint because I didn't get to stick around and continue the next day as I thought. So I squeezed out too much because I'm trying to follow. It is true, the mentality of this abundant. Right now, I've got very little paint on this palette. I've got a lot of blues and this olive green or whatever green that is, but I'm not really using those. I've been dabbing. The ones that I've been using are pretty much gone. So what that means is I'm starting to get cheap with my strokes, and I'm starting to use colors that I really didn't want to put in there. Do you see how blue that is? I don't want that blue because the leaves in front are going to be a dark bluish green. So I don't really want that at all. I want a little bit of a contrast in there. I don't want it to be the high point of contrast, but I want some contrast. So I need to get and put more paint on here and stop being cheap and go, oh, I'm so near the end. Put it out there, use the color I want, and don't, because in the end, it's just an excuse. And in the end, if I don't get the result that I want, am I really going to say, oh, I was just too lazy or cheap to put out new paint, because I know that in a little bit I'm going to have to stop doing this and go do some other responsibility that I have, okay? So I hope that works for you. Thanks.